Moorish, Orthodox, Radio, Crusade. Anarchism for the global city. Radical environmentalism for the concrete jungle. Esoteric explorations of the secret history of rebel culture. The Moorish Orthodox Radio Crusade. Exiled from WBAI 99.5 FM in New York City. Now only on the World Wide Web. Be there. Welcome aboard to what is now the 8th YouTube edition of the Moorish Orthodox Radio Crusade. Perhaps some of you saw last week my appearance on Democracy Now!, where I was speaking about the situation in Cajamarca, Peru, which unfortunately is rapidly escalating. People who have been following it will be aware that there is a mining company by the name of Yanacocha, which is 51% owned by Newmont Mining of Colorado, which is seeking to develop what will be an expansion of what is currently the largest gold mine in South America and the most high-altitude gold mine in the world. They want to expand the Yanacocha gold mine onto a piece of land called Conga. And there are currently 4 alpine lakes, 4 high-altitude lagunas at this place called Conga, which the mining company is proposing to destroy. They want to turn 2 of them into giant mine pits in order to get the gold which is underneath them, and to turn the other 2 into waste pits for the rock waste, which will be excavated from the other 2, from the first 2. Now, under a compromise plan, which the Peruvian government has proposed, they called for only destroying 2 of the lakes, not 4, in an attempt to mollify the extremely strong opposition to the plan among the Quechua campesinos of Cajamarca. But the movement in Cajamarca is not going for it, and they have said unequivocally that they are not going to allow Conga to be this piece of land to be turned into a mine at all. And they're not going to allow any of their lagunas to be destroyed. And it's been going back and forth for about a year now, where there's been a series of protests and what they call paros, which are, I call them civil strikes, where the entire region is shut down. Basically, it's like a general strike, except it isn't just the the workforce that goes on strike, but the peasants themselves, block the highways and generally enforce a closure. And they've had a lot of support from the teachers' union in particular. So basically, and significantly, they've had support from the regional government of Cajamarca, which is controlled by the left and is completely opposed to the expansion of this mining project. So basically, when they call a paro, the entire region is shut down, and all business is paralyzed, and all traffic is paralyzed. And that's happened repeatedly. It happened back in November, and when a bunch of campesinos attempted to occupy the site that they are hoping to expand the mine onto, a place called Conga, the national police opened fire, and a bunch of people were wounded. And unfortunately, we just saw a replay of this, where in a little town called Selendín, up in the mountains, just last week on July 3rd, the national police opened fire on a campesino protest, and 4 people were killed. And then the very next day, at a nearby town called Cajamarca, the same thing happened again. The police opened fire on a peasant protest, and another person was killed. So this now leaves a death toll of 5, and a state of emergency has been declared by the national government in Cajamarca. And well, I was glad to see that finally, at long last, there's been some interest in this situation here in the United States. I was invited on to talk about it on Democracy Now!, and I am going to have a piece about it in next month's issue of the Progressive magazine, that is to say the September issue, which will be on sale in August. And it's my piece is already up on the website. Just go to progressive.org and you can check it out. But it's been, of course, long-time listeners will be aware that it's a source of great frustration to me how little attention this situation is getting, and in general, the rapidly escalating peasant movements for defense of land and water throughout the Andean region, how little attention it's been getting. Now here in particular, this is a U.S.-backed gold mining project, and the national police, who are now turning their guns on unarmed protesters in Cajamarca, well, of course, they're being armed and trained by the United States, and the United States just 2 years ago entered into a free trade agreement with Peru. So, massive exports, and in particular mineral and oil exports, are sort of now codified into law under the free trade agreement. So we, up here in Gringolandia, bear direct responsibility in this situation. It's our tax dollars, and a company based within our borders, which are responsible for this situation. And in fact, I do understand that my friends in the Socialist Party are going to be organizing some kind of a protest at the Peruvian consulate here in New York City. So I am told. Be interesting to see if this comes to pass. It should be said that one of the primary concern of the movement in Cajamarca is for protection of the region's waters, which have been disappearing. Now, it's impossible to postulate a cause and effect relationship, of course, but nonetheless, it is a fact that the waters of Cajamarca region have been disappearing to the point where the capital city of Cajamarca, much of it now only has a few hours of water a day, whereas 10 years ago they had around-the-clock water, just like we do here in New York City. And the waters in the region have been disappearing throughout the same period of time over the past 10 years and change. That the Yanacocha mine has been turning the mountains, which protect the watersheds in the region, into giant mining pits. So the campesino communities are quite concerned that they're going to be losing their water, particularly given that these four highland lakes are slated to be destroyed by the project, or perhaps two under the modified plan. But whether it's two or four, the really tragic situation about any situation like this is once those lakes are gone, they're gone. They're gone forever. Now, the company says that they are going to be able to relocate the lakes. They're going to replace them with artificial reservoirs. But an artificial reservoir is not the same thing as a natural lake. For starters, the reservoirs are going to be under the control of the company, which raises questions about privatization of water and the communities being dependent on the company, which could potentially turn off the spigot. And even after the company pulls out, after the mine has been exhausted, raises the question of who is going to inherit those reservoirs and who is going to inherit all of the infrastructure for managing the toxic mine waste and so on. But a reservoir is also not the same sort of biotic community that a natural lake is. So the point is, once a lake is gone, it's gone for good. There's no bringing it back. And this weighs, on the whole, certainly the whole question of global warming and everything which our civilization, or climate change, I should say, because global warming is perhaps a little bit oversimplified. It should be viewed more in terms of a destabilization of the planetary biosphere, and we don't know if it's necessarily going to be uniformly warming. But certainly, sea level rise, bigger storms, basically the whole global system going out of whack. Well, once again, can it be decisively proven that any one extreme weather event is necessarily linked to climate change? Well, notoriously no. But the overall point, which everybody fails to grasp, is that we only have one planet. And this is it. we're talking about the future of humanity, and there is a certain logic, perhaps, to when the stakes are this high, erring on the side of caution as opposed to the side of recklessness. So while the oil industry and its paid propagandists put forth all of this propaganda about how climate change is only a theory and that it's not proven, and debate exactly what measures should be taken. Meanwhile, the people who are actually putting their lives on the line and standing up to armed police in defense of the biosphere are the peasants of Peru and other similar related indigenous and peasant movements around the world who are acting in their own enlightened self-interest and protecting their own resources and their own cultural survival, which also happens to mean the survival of the planet, and if only we could see it, the survival even of you and me here in the mega industrial cities of New York and Los Angeles and elsewhere in the global north, as it were. I do urge greater attention, at least. This is, the whatever solidarity we can loan to the Peruvian peasantry standing up to their resources, it all begins first and foremost with at least being aware that these struggles are going on. And certainly the struggle in Cajamarca is far from isolated. There are numerous struggles going on all over, particularly the Sierras of Peru at the moment, as well as in Bolivia, which really raises questions about the. Evo Morales is ostensibly on the left and does all this talk about protecting Mother Earth and so on, but he too has, in order to keep foreign exchange coming in, has had to open up a lot of the country's land to mineral interests, which has got a bunch of Bolivian peasants upset, and there are these similar conflicts in Bolivia now as well. But I believe in some people were just recently killed at a place in called Cajamarca in a similar struggle. At least one dead there in Bolivia, in Potosi department on the Altiplano. But I believe that all told this year there have been a total of 12 killed in social conflicts related to resource extraction around Peru. There was most recently a case in a place called Espinar in Cusco department, where peasants were similarly standing up to the authorities over a mining project on their lands, which they feared was going to pollute their water. In fact, actually has been polluting their water, and they were similarly fired upon by the national police. So these struggles are going on all over the Andes now, actually. There was a huge mobilization earlier this year in Ecuador, where thousands of campesinos marched on the national capital of Quito over precisely these issues, over defense of water, particularly for mineral interests. I sort of feel like, the whole world is like that famous song by Sting, when the whole world is going down, like the best of what's still around. I feel like, we're losing a little bit of the world every day. And it's the people who inspire me most in terms of actually putting their bodies on the line to slow the destruction so that maybe there will be a little bit of something left for the next generation to fight for, are in places like Cajamarca, Peru. Maybe this would be a good place to take our first musical break. Should we take a little break? I'll take a little bit more tea.
والله شوف شرم مرة ولا
So back in the, I guess, the early 90s, in both Mali and in Niger, the Tuaregs took up arms, demanding, at a minimum, a bigger piece of the pie from, the proceeds from this mineral exploitation, or demanding local autonomy, actually self-government in their region, or the more extreme elements actually demanding independence and wanting, their own Tuareg state in the Sahara. And during this period, they were backed by Muammar Gaddafi for his own interests, basically because the governments in Mali and Niger were being backed by the West, and this was when Gaddafi was on the outs with the West, and so he was sort of, as I said in the last show we did about this, back in almost a year ago, Gaddafi was sort of doing the right thing for the wrong reason. I mean, he had his own, cynical interest at heart, but the Tuaregs had legitimate grievances. So he was arming them during that period, and then later, just about the same time that Gaddafi was sort of being embraced again by the West, and the sanctions were being dropped against Libya and so on, he helped broker peace deals in which most, not all, of the Tuareg rebels laid down their arms. And then, fast forwarding to the last year, when Gaddafi's regime was faced with collapse and people were taking up arms against him all over the country, he sort of called in the chips on the Tuareg rebels in Mali and Niger and said, "Okay, guys, I helped you out. Now you got to help me out, and you got to come to Libya and fight for me, and I'll pay you." So a lot of them did. And then when the regime finally collapsed, a lot of them fled back into Mali with a lot of guns that they were able to, take from Gaddafi's arsenal before his regime collapsed. So, now, combat-hardened the Tuareg fighters with, a lot of arms flooded back into Mali and declared the independent state of Azawad in the northern half of the country, which again is an area the size of France, although very, very sparsely populated. It's the middle of the Sahara Desert, and the major city there is Timbuktu, which is also the southernmost city, which is right on the Niger River, and sort of where the desert caravans, which have been maintained by the Tuaregs for centuries, would meet with the river trade route that goes into sub-Saharan Africa. So for a while, a group called the National Movement for the Liberation of Azawad, the MNLA, which was avowedly secular, was in power. But it soon became clear that these jihadist elements, backed by the so-called Akim, the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb organization, sort of had a second revolution in Azawad and ousted the MNLA and usurped power. And now the MNLA appears to be on the run, and lots of Tuareg refugees are fleeing into Mauritania and into Niger, and these jihadists who are actually quite hostile to the traditional Tuareg culture, as is evidenced in the destruction of the Sufi shrines in Timbuktu, have now taken power throughout the entire region. And one wonders how long this situation is going to last. And I sort of would have thought that with a vast swath of the middle of the Sahara Desert now essentially under the control of Al-Qaeda in its local manifestation, this Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, that the world powers would have acted. And of course, that in itself is extremely problematic. No matter how you look at the situation, it's problematic. But they haven't yet, and I think one of the reasons they haven't is that, it's the middle of the Sahara, And yeah, there's uranium there and there's resources that they'd like to extract, but they can sort of just let the situation fester. And I will point out that when the Tuaregs were maintaining their insurgency in the 1990s, there was ethnic cleansing in the in both Mali and in Niger, in these extremely remote parts of the country in the Sahara, in the Tuareg strongholds, where the usual situation of whole populations being forced to flee and villages being destroyed, and all this sort of thing was happening in the Utitledhe Fogas mountains in northern Mali, and the other Tuareg strongholds. And this was at the same time that the same sort of thing was going on in Bosnia and Kosovo, and it was daily headlines, and nobody knew anything about what was going on in northern Mali, because rather than being in the middle of Europe, immediately across the Adriatic from Italy, it was in the interior Sahara. So they can sort of afford to let the situation fester for a while. But one would think not forever. And probably, I would imagine, there's going to be some kind of international intervention, which is going to be taking place. And again, this is going to be, this is going to open a whole new set of contradictions. And to a certain extent, it can be argued that this whole situation was created by international intervention. And the whole drive against Gaddafi, sort of created this domino effect, and now Mali has been destabilized. But then again, I don't claim to have an answer to the people who last March were sitting in Benghazi as Gaddafi's army was advancing on them, promising a massacre. Actually, explicitly saying that it's going to be a massacre, and it's going to be rivers of blood, and invoking Tiananmen Square, and ironically invoking what the Israelis did in Gaza. So I don't have any answer to them in terms of what the correct response of the outside world was. They were the people in Benghazi who were waiting on a massacre were quite happy for the Western powers to intervene and to bomb Gaddafi's column, which was advancing on their city. Now, is the stance of the Western powers hypocritical? Absolutely. The Western powers were backing Israel when Israel did exactly the same thing in Gaza that Gaddafi was getting ready to do in Benghazi. Of course the stance of the Western powers is hypocritical. But when you're sitting in Benghazi waiting to be massacred, maybe that's not the first and foremost thing on your mind, is whether the Western powers are hypocritical. The first and foremost thing on your mind is surviving and living to fight another day. So, there aren't any easy answers here. I don't pretend to have easy answers. And, the people who were merely, cheering on the Western intervention without asking any of the tough questions, well, I put forward those tough questions. I was warning that there could be a domino effect and that the war could spread and become internationalized. And unfortunately, I've now been completely vindicated. And, the Al-Qaeda is essentially in control of the Central Sahara and is destroying the Sufi shrines of Timbuktu. But the sort of the knee-jerk lefties out there, like ANSWER, International Action Center, Cynthia McKinney, who were, hands off Libya and supporting Gaddafi, well, that's not particularly, it's not a particularly honest approach to the question either. So I don't pretend to have an easy answer, and I don't trust anybody who does pretend to have easy answers. And the point of my work as a journalist and a commentator is to try to provoke honesty and thought and dialogue and hashing things out, as opposed to merely propounding some kind of bogus easy answer. So I don't know, and I don't know what's to be done now. But I do know that in terms of what the stance is of progressives here in the United States and in New York City and on these questions is, finally, progressives in the United States are beginning to take a little bit of a note of what's happening in Cajamarca, Peru. And I applaud the Progressive magazine for giving me an assignment, and I should point out the Nation Institute for giving me a budget to go down to Peru to write about it. And I applaud Democracy Now! For giving me a little time to talk about it on the airwaves. And in fact, if my buds in the Socialist Party actually get it together to do some kind of protest at the Peruvian consulate, I applaud them as well. But basically, for the many, many years that I've been writing about and doing radio work regarding indigenous struggles in Latin America, well, back during the Zapatista revolt in Mexico, back in the 1990s, there was a lot of interest. And basically, I hate to say it, the more cynical part of me says that was because, they wore ski masks and they carried rifles. And there's this tendency on the left to fetishize ski masks and rifles. So they actually did get some enthusiasm. But in the years since then, and particularly since 9/11, which I sort of see as a real sort of turning point where everything started to go wrong in the world, and that includes the whole level of dialogue and consciousness on the American left, there's been very, very, very little interest in indigenous struggles in Latin America. And basically the response that I get when I talk about indigenous struggles in Peru, which has really been on the front lines for the past 5 years or so, the response which I generally get from my fellow lefties is one of lukewarm support. I mean, they'll basically say, yeah, the presidents are on the right side and we support them, but not that much really. Next, what else is going on? Not a lot of interest. Sort of perfunctory and lukewarm support. Now, as for these, more morally complicated situations, such as Libya and Syria and Mali, or Azawad, as now breakaway northern Mali is being called, the situation, the response for these situations evoked from the left is much, much, much more problematic. Because, on one hand, you sort of got the liberal laptop bombardiers, as it were, who, sort of cheer on Western intervention as if this was some kind of an easy answer. And then you've got, on the other side, the knee-jerk anti-interventionist. And I'm using the word knee-jerk here, okay? There may be a legitimate, anti-intervention position, which I'd like to hear. But unfortunately, I'm not hearing it. What I'm hearing is a bunch of knee-jerk malarkey that we all have to rally around dictators like Gaddafi and Assad, which is no answer. And to portray the legitimate revolutionary movements, and this is, when I say legitimate, this doesn't mean that they're as pure as the driven snow, okay? But it means that they are legitimate movements and that they're actually coming up from the grassroots, and people who are quite legitimately and inevitably angry at the boots which have been on their neck for a long, long time, are, have said enough is enough, and they're taking up arms. Legitimate in that sense, okay? Portraying these legitimate revolutionary movements as, some kind of astroturf conspiracy or illusion which was created by the U.S. State Department or the CIA or George Soros is just ridiculous. It's nothing to do with reality at all, right? So, and once again, I don't know what the easy answers are. There aren't any easy answers, that's for sure. I don't know what the answers are. But, unfortunately, the left has been completely, 100%, as has the mainstream media, as has the right and the center, completely ignoring what has been happening in Timbuktu. And even now that the, that the jihadis are enforcing Sharia at gunpoint and destroying these precious Sufi shrines, this, heritage, great cultural heritage to humanity, which is now being lost forever, still hardly anybody's paying attention. And I would imagine that finally, when the Western powers get around to launching some kind of multilateral intervention to drive the jihadis out of Timbuktu, then all of a sudden the lefties are going to start paying attention, and they're going to be, U.S. imperialism hands off Mali, which, maybe I agree. Without a doubt, any projection of U.S. military power on the global stage is definitely very, very problematic in multiple ways. And certainly the people who are suffering under the jihadis in Timbuktu now are going to be suffering even more once U.S. bombs are falling on them. So, I'm not here, by no means am I here to portray Western intervention as some kind of easy solution. But I do think it's fundamentally dishonest for the left in the United States to completely ignore the situation and then just to, simplistically say no U.S. intervention once it gets to the point where things are this out of control. And what I hear over and over and over again is that, there is no Al-Qaeda, that it's all, a CIA apparition. And, these people just don't pay any attention to what's going on in the world. People who say that, Al-Qaeda has now achieved state power in Timbuktu and a huge swath of Africa the size of France. They're in control. So if you think they don't exist, well, I'd love to know who's running Timbuktu and who's destroying the Sufi shrines in Timbuktu. Is paid CIA agents? I'm a little bit skeptical of that notion. In fact, I think it's completely wacky. So, the basic question is, all right, the less complicated question is what can we do to loan some solidarity to the peasants who are standing up in defense of their lands in Peru? And, well, once again, I really hope that my friends who are saying that they're going to organize some kind of protest at the consulate get around to doing it. Situation, once again, is pretty morally clear-cut. Situation in Timbuktu, it's messier, without a doubt. But I would like to at least see some grappling, some discussion about what we can do to loan some solidarity to the Tuaregs and the Fulani and the Mandinka and the other peoples of multi-ethnic Timbuktu who are now under the gun of the jihadis, under the gun of Al-Qaeda, under the gun of the African Taliban, more or less, the North African Taliban, and are seeing their way of life destroyed, their traditional Sufi folk Islam being brutally suppressed, and women being forced at gunpoint to take the veil and to stay indoors after dark. What kind of solidarity can we loan them? Can we at least start the discussion? And can we at least give them the solidarity of being aware of what is happening to them? Can we begin with that? That's enough for this week. I cover these issues, both Peru and Timbuktu, quite intimately on my website, WorldWar4Report.com. That's in Arabic, numeral 4, report.com. Let's go to www.4report.com and read all about it. Leave a comment. I'd like to hear what you have to say. See you next time. Assalamu alaikum.